guys, it's Dina
and Lydia,
and you're listening to Retweet.
and today we brought on our really good friend Oshi, and we're going to be talking about BDSM, polyamory, being queer, and essentially just non-conventional forms of sex. So me and Oshi know each other because
I come into your place of work quite often.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the reason why we chose you is because it was your birthday. And
Yes.
you came into Filthy Being, which is where I work.
Yes.
And I asked you what you did for your birthday. You're telling me,
Yes.
you're listing all these things that are pretty normal. You know, I went out to dinner, I got flowers, all these things.
I got myself flowers, by the way.
Yeah.
Nobody got me flowers. Correction.
We got flowers, and then
We got them.
We got them either way. And then you said, I also went to a dungeon.
I'm an open book, so when people at work know that I'm kinky, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to my dungeon day. It's my dungeon day today, and they're like, oh, have a kinky time on my birthday. We'll start from there. I was topped by a female dom and tied up to a wall and whipped and flogged and pleasured in front of about 20 people. So BDSM stands for bondage, dominance, submission, and then sadism and masochism. When you think about BDSM culture, a lot of people think of like 50 Shades of Grey, where, you know, there's the red room. Not always red. Putting it out there, my room is grey, and it gets pretty 50 Shades of Grey in there. I think a lot of people think of like dominant and submissive, but then there's like different interactions, right? There's littles and daddies and middles and bigs. Littles are people who are like young, so people you'll see wearing like onesies, carrying like soft toys and plushies. And then middles are like that grade school teen, you know, they like doing coloring and little things, and you know, they usually have like mummies or daddies who like take care of them. And then bigs are teens and above who would have that. So there's those interactions. Then you have princess, and then you've got brats who like instigate dominance and tops to like hurt them or like annoy them.
Also, when you say like teen or like littles, like these are people who were actually little, right? Like these are people who were adults.
These are like
They're adults. They're just dressed up.
Okay.
As like
We
not
just-
even dressed up sometimes.
We wanted to make sure.
So somebody would be like, oh, I'm littling out, which would mean that they just want to like play with a toy or like be in the corner, but they'll be dressed like me. Like you don't even have to dress. It's just a mindset.
It's a mindset.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're not talking about like children.
No children. I think that's another misconception too. It's like, oh, people in BDSM, they have no like morals, which is something that I've come across. So it's like, no, you do something called having a negotiation. So if, you know, 50 Shades of Grey is the only thing you watched, or some porn is the only thing you watch, sometimes they'll have like contracts. That's a real thing.
So what would the contracts include? Just like consent?
So consent is one. Triggers, trigger words, hard limits, soft limits, places that you can play in, who you will be interacting with, the tops allowed to bring others. Like there's so many parts to an interaction that you have to negotiate all of that.
And I think just like with BDSM in general, it's very consent focused.
Oh
and
yeah, absolutely.
Very focused on people's limits and open communication.
Oh yeah.
With like having things like trigger words and stuff that you don't get in conventional sex.
And that's the funny thing, because you're taught that BDSM is this, you know, almost negative, immoral thing, when really, like, look at like regular vanilla heterosexual monogamous sex. A lot of the things that are like happening that are illegal or hurtful are happening mostly in those spaces opposed to BDSM sex dungeons.
Absolutely. I was a late bloomer, which people find really funny. I lost my virginity at 21. I have a friend where she mainly deals with like the care, like the aftercare, massages, oils, blends, things.
So there's aftercare that goes into it too.
Yeah, aftercare is a big part of it. So depending on the kind of scene I'm doing, one of my aftercares is literally a burrito. Like I need a burrito and I need to be like
people don't, heterosexual vanilla sex don't even know to pee after having sex. And
You guys have a whole like aftercare.
Yeah. One of the main things you don't do is you don't kink shame. Like if it's not hurting anybody, I mean,
we do like to hurt.
one thing is like needle play. Is where you take...
No, I'm sorry.
We really are shaking. We're shaking it in the studio because she said needles.
Needles. So
Do you think there is a correlation between maybe like things that have happened throughout people's lives that translate into kinks?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. For example, I have a weird thing with voices where if it's a high-pitched voice, like I get really like toppy. I'm like, I want to tie you to the bench and spank you till you cry. I mentioned this before we started recording, like my mom wouldn't know this. Grew up in a place where I had to suppress a lot of things, my sexuality, my attractions, my sex life. So yeah, of course you get people who are just like, oh, so you're like amoral and like you don't create real relationships with people, and oh, people just like you for your body. It's like, okay, if that's what you think, go for it.
Because the thing is about the social stigma too, it's not just like we're not teaching about BDSM in sex education classes. It's not just, you know, we all have this Christian morale or religious morale that teaches us not to. We actually learned in class, both Dean and I, because we took a sex education class, that we literally mention every episode.
Thank you, Nicole Edwards.
Thank you, Nicole
Edwards. Taught us everything we know.
Literally. But it's also in some ways against the law to be into BDSM. Like, had a document where they're explaining under the Canadian law, a person cannot consent to physical harm. So bodily harm is defined as something that interferes with the health and comfort of people. And technically BDSM is under this category. However, it's interesting because despite BDSM entering this category, when we look at sports, like people in hockey will fight each other until they have bloody noses.
Yeah.
But we don't give a shit about that. It's something we actually all, as a collective...
I get excited when people get beat up in hockey. I watch hockey a lot.
I mean, as a collective, we literally...
even like UFC or like anything like that, like you're...
Any contact sport.
We watch it, we film it, we actually
these football
rewatch
players
it.
They have
concussions?
like they're concussed.
We watch it in slow-mo, but we don't care because it has nothing to do with sex.
For example, every guy I've talked to on all the online dating apps I've been on, I always like asking the question, what's your sexual fantasy? Because my ones are fucked. Why aren't you happy with, you know, lying down, starfishing, and having a good time? Like, it's the same thing where so many sexual relationships fall apart because women don't orgasm. Because people don't care.
So in class, we talked about how, well, our professor did research on people that identify as feminists, but then also partake in BDSM, and how there's a form of kind of kinkophobia within feminist culture where these women couldn't confidently feel like they were able to have like a submissive, prefer submissiveness, and then also be a feminist.
Right.
And like, do you think that that's something that you struggle with, or do you see it within other people, or how do you think that plays out?
I do see it within other people, but more so I feel the times I've encountered that, and I have, is when other people put it on you. It's like, how can you be a feminist if you let this guy beat you? It's a matter of understanding that the fact that I'm letting this person beat me is my choice. And I'm in a place in my life that I can allow somebody to do that without that having a negative effect. And I think that's more empowering than anything, where I have accepted my sexuality. It's really hard not to live your life the way that you're going to feel fulfilled. Because BDSM is directly proportional to your fulfillment in life.
Do you date people specifically who are into BDSM?
Not exactly.
Okay.
And I guess that's where the polyamory comes in.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking before about the stigma, specifically for women in BDSM, and how it might be a little bit harder for them. I think the same is true for polyamory. Obviously, polyamory is not something that's socially acceptable, period.
No.
But in some ways, it's almost okay for men to be polyamorous, if that makes sense.
Because they're a player.
Maybe we don't call it polyamorous.
We call it he's a cheater and has 3 girlfriends.
For some reason, women being polyamorous.
She's a whore, she's a slut, she's promiscuous.
Yeah.
I think it's also people misunderstanding what polyamory is. I have grappled with the fact that I am polyamorous for a long time because it is so against everything I've been taught growing up. I'm from Sri Lanka. I grew up in a traditional household. My parents have been married for 37 years now. It's very much in my blood to be like, oh God, this is all wrong. It's not that you are like, oh, I don't want one person, I want 100. It's more that your needs are like a jigsaw puzzle, and each different person you're with fits into that as a different piece, and all of them together make a whole.
Do you feel like it's something that is almost like your orientation? Because you kind of explain yourself to be like, I am poly. Like, it's almost an identification thing.
It is an identification thing. It's not so much attached to my sexuality, because like I don't think you have to be like pan or bi or gay to be poly, but I think it is very much a part of your identity, where I've had friends who are like, oh, I came out to my parents as poly.
Telling you, like, every time I read about polyamory, every time people say points about like the positive polyamory, like, you know, you have friends, you don't have just one friend, you might have one best friend, but you have other friends that fulfill different needs, just kind of like the jigsaw puzzle analogy, and that makes literally the most amount of sense to me. Especially on a romantic level. Like, you can have someone that you connect with, like, on a best friend or on a best romantic partner level, and still have other people you might want to go to dinner with, or some people you just want to make out with. But it's just, like, emotionally, I'm not there yet.